requirements being made about when, when and where bluegrass can be put, and xeriscaping and HOAs, and so it's really interesting to hear the conversations that are happening here too. And I feel like he was very brave to get up in front of this group and answer questions. I'm kind of impressed. So I am currently, first of all, I grew up in Fort Collins. My mom's from Laramie, so like coming up to Cheyenne, it feels really good. I live just south of Fort Collins, about an hour. But I have a statewide position for extension, and that is as the Sustainable Landscape State Specialist. And so I talk a lot about native plants and pollinator habitat and water conservation and all this kind of stuff. So everything that's been covered today is very near and dear to my heart. And when Lauren was giving her talk, I was just, inspired and thinking about things that I wanted to add. And so anyway, thank you for having me is what I'm trying to say. If the lights could go down a little bit, I think my slides will be easier to see. So the theme I was told of this is native plant garden planning, planting, and preserving. So I'm the preserving part, which is actually maintenance. Maintenance didn't really flow with the title of the conference, so we said preserving. So I'm going to go into some maintenance practices really around supporting pollinators and wildlife. So garden maintenance is arguably the most important part for the success of a project. So I have a degree in horticulture from CSU, and I also have trained as a landscape architect from the University of Arizona. And so I know the design side, and then I also worked in the horticulture industry for a long time. So I have the design side, the installation, and the maintenance side of things. And you can have a project that is designed perfectly, everything is spec'd out just right. Everything can be installed just spot on, and if it's not maintained correctly, it can totally fail. Like somebody was saying, don't come mow down my meadow, right? Like that was very intentional. But if a maintenance company comes in and mows it down, then it's not doing what you want it to do. So when we're talking about garden maintenance for pollinators and other wildlife, I like to think of that we're practicing horticulture with an ecological lens. So we're not just looking at beautifying the space, but we're thinking about everybody, all the other creatures that are using the site, so whether that's people or wildlife. And so I've never been in a room with 4 huge screens. I don't know where to point, but we've got, boy, you can make it all the way up there. We've got butterflies all around us. Everybody loves to see larger fauna like the fox. And then if we look at the yellow bird right in the middle, I bet somebody in this room can identify that bird. Yellow warbler, okay, good. It was a good picture for my example, but so we love seeing that kind of thing, and that is what my eye is drawn to. And I'm wondering if anybody is noticing the little notch out of the leaf, and does it bother you? Because I hope it doesn't. Of course, what made that little notch is that tiny little caterpillar in the bird's mouth. And of course, that bird is going to go feed its clutch of chicks, and then we have, the cycle of life, and it's all a beautiful thing. But in sort of traditional horticulture, we see this little notch out of the leaf, and we think, oh gosh, we have pests, we have to do something about that. But when we're practicing horticulture through this ecological lens, maybe our tolerance is different, and in fact, we're trying to attract some of those invertebrate species. Yes, my animation. Holding nudge to the caterpillar. So, if we look at what the objective of a landscape is or has traditionally been, we want beautiful gardens. We want to beautify our spaces. We want curb appeal, right? It's nice to roll up to your house or be driving through a town and it looks good. So that curb appeal is really one of the main things that general public think of. However, I'm guessing you're all familiar with Doug Tallamy. He's written several great books. We can really put our landscapes to work, right? So he has this quote, he says, in the past, we've asked one thing of our gardens, and that is that they be pretty, but now they have to support life, sequester carbon, feed pollinators, and manage water, like do all these things. And what's really cool is that they can be beautiful, but they can also have ecological value. And so an objective of perhaps a sustainable garden is a beautiful garden that protects or restores the benefits that nature provides to humans that are essential to our everyday life. And then I have a little asterisk there. Basically, what we're describing there are ecosystem services. So a garden that fits into the Habitat Hero model is going to be beautiful for us, but also have this ecological value. Just by show of hands, who is familiar with the term ecosystem services? Okay, quite a few. That's awesome. Not surprising. If you are not, we're going to go into it just a little bit. So ecosystem services are basically the services that nature provides humans without without us like making it happen. So there are 4 categories of them. There are cultural, provisioning, regulating, and supporting. And so as nature is doing its thing, we have water cycles, we have plants, we have animals just living their lives. They are offering us these ecosystem services. Things like raw material for clothes, for fiber, for medicine. Pollination is a huge one, right? The bees are going out, they're pollinating these crops because that's just part of their natural life cycle. But how nice for us, they're pollinating the food that we eat. So here we have pollination, again for aesthetics, but also food crops. Do we have to have bees pollinate? Not necessarily, but this is a strawberry that was pollinated. This is one that was not. I know which one I would prefer. Like I said, this is cotton, so fiber. Natural, mental and physical well-being. We all benefit from getting outside, whether it's on these trails or it's in our own gardens. Things like flood mitigation and cleaning water and air, and then medicine. There are cures to horrible diseases out there that we have yet to discover, many of which may come from plants or fungi. So this is awesome. Ecosystem services are great, but how do we manage for them? And it doesn't sound very fun, right? We're like, no, we want pretty gardens, we want to attract the pollinators and give them habitat, but we can also be managing for these ecosystem services, which is cool. So the thing that caught, I think, the committee's eye that I'm a part of was creating these habitat-friendly landscape maintenance guidelines. And this is a large document, and it kind of outlines a whole host of things that we can do, steps we can take to manage our landscapes a little differently that will really support pollinators and other wildlife. It was put together by somebody from the Butterfly Pavilion, CSU Extension, High Plains Environmental Center, if you're familiar with them, they're down in Loveland, and a landscape architect from Norris Design, which is a national landscape architecture firm. So we were all kind of working in the same realm, and we were realizing we really need this. So industry needs this, like the folks that are being hired to maintain these kinds of landscapes, they need to understand it because it's not just mow and blow, it's not just turf grass. But home gardeners are really curious too. So we did this massive brain dump. We got together over the course of a year, and we just sort of put everything we possibly could into a gigantic Excel spreadsheet. Like I said, I listed off the players. There was also a previous effort. There was a committee, maybe in the early 2000s, who had done something similar, but it didn't go anywhere. You know how that happens? People have really great ideas, and there's a lot of momentum, and then it just kind of nothing happens. But this great work had been done, so we were like, let's grab this and also incorporate that. And then we looked at design versus maintenance expectations. Because again, this is all about maintenance, and you can design something to look really pretty, but it might be really hard to maintain. So we wanted to kind of tease those things apart. We needed to define the audience who was actually going to be using this. Like I said, the industry was really important, but we also saw that home gardeners would want to do it. And then we identified the most effective tools, kind of looked at the overlap, where a landscape architect might need it, where a landscape contractor might be utilizing these things. And then we created this document. So who can use it? Anybody can. Anybody that has anything to do with landscaping or horticulture or gardening. These are the folks that so far have been using it the most. Design firms, parks, HOAs. I heard HOAs. HOAs are tricky. But along the Front Range in Colorado, more and more HOAs are starting to shift to allowing xeriscape, and some cities, I actually wanted to kind of sit down with him. He's not here anymore. Mark, was that his name? Because we have a lot of lessons learned actually from down where I live, because we have been trying these things, and there are some communities that have written into their code that HOAs cannot in fact, restrict xeriscaping or water-wise landscaping. But it was hard fought, and there were, blunders along the way. Anyway, let's get back to individual home gardeners and what you all can do. So when we're talking about habitat-friendly maintenance, we're really talking about a style of landscape maintenance that just allows for the plants and the animals to fully celebrate their life cycles and their processing. So we're allowing for nature and ecology to thrive in this constructed setting, right? Because we're recreating these little natural areas. They can be designed for and maintained with very similar parameters as whatever the current standards or current practices might be. We're just sort of shifting timing a little bit, and we're thinking about things a little more fully. And I'm going to go into those examples. And then also we're trying to de-risk this transition because, not so much for home gardeners, you all are experimenters, and I think Lauren said, plants die, right? It's trial and error, you stick something in, it doesn't work, you try something else. But even for home gardeners, especially if you're new to it, and then also industry folks, people that are in the landscaping business, it can be risky to try something new, right? You might have to spend a little more money or something like that. So we're trying to sort of de-risk and demystify all of this. So with all these different categories that we put all this thought and effort into, and one of the main things when you're talking about native plants, first of all, they don't have to be messy. That's an important thing to note. Some people think the messy sort of naturalistic style is really pretty, really attractive. But some people just think native plant is going to be messy. I don't like it. It doesn't have to be messy. Any plant, whether it's an introduced species from Asia or Europe, or it's a Cheyenne native plant, it's going to need some sort of specific treatment to get a particular result, right? So even if you're just deadheading to make it flower more, you're doing some kind of maintenance. But even native plants can be sheared and espaliered and pollarded and all of these things. And then Lauren also touched on this, but natives don't shine in the nursery, right? So they are not bred. When you go to a greenhouse or a nursery, most of those plants, if they're not native, they were bred to look really good on a greenhouse or nursery bench in a 4-inch pot. Lots of time, lots of effort was put into that. Native plants, not so. Because native plants are sort of having a moment, there's a lot of research being done trying to figure out how we can make them look more attractive in pots. It's still not going that well. So we all have to know that they are diamonds in the rough. We see their potential. We know that if we put that in the ground in 2 years, maybe 3 years, it's going to look amazing. Some of the transformation pictures that Lori shared were incredible. And she was saying this was 1 year later. So you have to know that natives they're gonna get there. You just have to give them some time. So some of the general maintenance differences between sort of your traditional landscape and more native landscape, your spring and fall cleanup might be different, the timing might be different. Obviously, generally less water. You're not going to need to use fertilizer and soil amendments as much. And then we're going to talk about mulch. Mulch is really important. Not too much, not too little. It's a little bit Goldilocks-y, but also looking at what type is really important. All right, so I know that now we're getting into some sort of small text here, but I'm going to walk you through this chart a little bit. So this is actually taken out of a study, and this is comparing different kinds of maintenance for different kinds of landscapes. So we have border perennials, exotic wild perennials, and native wild perennials. So we're looking at, and then we have the garden habitat that you're creating, the maintenance that's required in a growing season, how much labor, what kind of labor, what kind of plant knowledge you might need to have, and then the main types of work. So if we're looking over here, for example, if we're looking at maintenance in a traditional border perennial, it's kind of regular ongoing maintenance. Exotic wild perennials, occasional maintenance. And then if it's a native wild perennial garden bed, it's very minimal, right? These plants don't need a lot of input. Now, on the other hand, if you look at labor for a border perennial, you don't really need skilled labor, but if you hop over to natives, you need skilled labor and you need to be enthusiastic. You need to want to have to do it, right? And I think that fits very much with anybody gardening in Colorado or Wyoming. It is a labor of love, right? When I was listening to the earlier talks, I was like, bless you all for wanting to garden in Cheyenne, Wyoming. I think it's hard where I live. It's even harder up here, but it's so worth it. So you gotta be enthusiastic. Plant knowledge. You don't necessarily need to have a ton of plant knowledge to grow plants where you put them in the ground, you give them some water, and they're gonna be okay because you're dumping fertilizer on them. Native plants, you really kind of do need to have some plant knowledge. Doesn't necessarily mean you need to know all of the scientific names of every plant, but you need to kind of know what you're doing, at least understand how different plant families act and what they might want. So there is some, a bit higher need when you're dealing with native plants as far as your knowledge base, but the actual maintenance that needs to be done is lower. And then there's something called adaptive management. And that is where we really have to pay attention to, we're adapting to change. Like down where I live, we generally say you can start planting things after Mother's Day. What is the case here? What's your deadline? Or like July 4th, Memorial Day. What? So a little bit later, August was Father's Day. Okay, right. We all like to have those times that we can sort of keep in mind. What was it that Lauren said that happens around tax day? Oh, the cedar waxwings come in. Is that what she said? No. She said something happens on tax day. Oh, the hummingbirds come in. That's what it was. Yes. So I used to live and work in Austin, Texas. I worked at the Lady Bird Johnson Wildflower Center. And tax day was when we could tell the public that the bluebonnets would be up and you could come take your picture. So it's kind of funny. We set our natural systems to our calendars. Anyway, when we're talking about native plants and gardening for wildlife, we can't be so prescriptive, right? We're working with these dynamic systems. Weather is uncertain. We can prioritize certain things, but we can't really say, okay, July 4th, I can plant everything. Because apparently, that might not be true here. So this is what an adaptive management framework looks like. So you're planning, you're implementing, so you're planning out your garden, you're buying your plants, you're putting them in, and then you kind of monitor. And this is sort of the growing season, like what's working, what isn't working. And then you're really evaluating and you're paying attention and you're thinking, okay, maybe I'm not gonna try this the same way next year. But then generally what happens, and I think it's just human nature, we kind of stop here and then we just do the same thing we did last year. So adaptive management is where we actually adjust. We actually change this. And backyard gardeners are probably the best at this kind of adaptive management. We're like, oh, that didn't work, I'm gonna try something else. I loved her example of the person who has the currants that's being eaten and they have fence around it, and she said, well, try offering up one to the deers, take the fencing off of that and keep the other ones fenced. It's kind of like we're sort of doing little experiments all the time, so I liked that. Okay, back to habitat-friendly landscape maintenance guidelines. So I'm now going to walk through some of these things so you can kind of get a gist of what we're talking about. And I will say, I have a bunch of resources at the end, rather than printing them all out and not knowing, who might want them, but they're through a QR code. And if you're not familiar with QR codes, they're pretty easy and they work pretty well. This is in, in another many minutes. But you'll want to get your phone out and you'll basically take a picture of the thing and it'll pull up a website with all the resources. Okay. So the way things are divided, we have general general maintenance guidelines, and then habitat-specific guidelines. So you can see on the left, there's G, GG, and HS. And then you can see the different audiences that might benefit from using these different things. So move along. So we have a pruning section for an example. So hopefully you're close enough to a screen that you can read the text. A general maintenance guideline is you of course want to prune at the right time, right? Like maples, you want to prune in late winter before sap starts to flow. Otherwise you get all the dripping sap. General guideline, you want to check the stature of trees annually and prune as needed, right? Are there crossing branches? Are there dead branches? That's the general stuff. A habitat-specific pruning guideline is that you do not want to cut perennials back in the fall unless you need to do it for safety or sanitation. And in fact, you want to leave the seeds and leaves for winter interest and habitat. Again, Lauren talked about that. So that's a really important thing, and you've got to move away from, oh, it's the end of the season, I just cut this all back no matter what. Now, if you do have to cut back these perennials earlier than you maybe want to, you want to leave some height. So you want to cut back to 1 foot or higher to provide those stems for nesting and overwintering bees, right? Because we have cavity nesting bees. I looked it up, and I think Wyoming has somewhere around 550 known species of native bees. Does anybody happen to know? Does that number sound right? Anybody? Well, I think it's right, so we'll go with that. So about 550 native species, right? So you've got honeybees and then all the bumblebees, but you have hundreds of other native bees. Some of them are cavity nesters, and some of them are ground nesting bees. So there are studies, so more and more people are saying, don't cut back your perennials because the native bees nest in there. But sometimes you just kind of have to do it. So there are some studies going on right now to look at if you have a perennial and you cut it back and you think there might be nesting bees in there, if you just lay the material down so that they can continue overwintering and continue their life cycle and fly out the next spring, if it messes them up going from vertical to horizontal. So, somebody thought, oh, well, this is easy, just cut it down and lay it flat, but it actually might mess it up. So more on that later. And then another habitat-specific guideline, consider a stepwise spring cleanup. So wait for new growth to appear before you start to cut things back. And then again, leave some of those stems throughout the spring and summer during that nesting season. So it's not just you drive by places and everything is just totally mowed down. Well, maybe have it be a little more dynamic than that. Here's another one, leave some debris for overwintering pollinator pupa and other beneficials. So many of our invertebrates, which are so important, overwinter in that leaf litter. Is the Leave the Leaves sort of campaign a thing up here? Are you hearing about that? Leave the Leaves? Yeah. Kind of, sort of. They mostly blow away. Right. We blow windy up here. What's that? Don't mow the leaves. Yeah, okay. So in addition to matching our gardening to our calendars, we like slogans. No Mow May is one, Leave the Leaves is one. So Leave the Leaves is good, but there's always nuance to these things. So if you do have turf, sometimes there's a need for turf, and you leave a thick layer of leaves, maybe they'll blow away, but if you're in a protected site and they don't blow away, if it's too much and they get covered with snow, then you're going to create snow mold and you're going to have all kinds of issues with your turf then. But if you can put your leaves into perennial beds, it's going to insulate the plants and it's going to provide habitat for those overwintering invertebrates.
Or you can rake them.
Rake them into those beds, right?
Yeah, but even if you loosen them up on your lawn, even around the snow,
yes,
it is possible we melt.
You can rake them and loosen them up, and then you won't get those issues. Thank you. So if you do have to remove them, of course you want to compost them to sort of close that cycle. Another pruning one is avoid pruning tall shrubs during bird nesting season. So I don't know if everybody knows when birds nest, but that is certainly something to think about, right? Like you're creating all this habitat and you have the perfect species for some certain type of bird and they're nesting and you're like, oh gosh, I got to get in there and prune. And if you're disrupting their life cycle, then you're not having that full, the full cycle happen. And then it's super important to know, this is more of a general concept, but know whether your plants bloom on old wood or new wood in order to avoid the loss of blooms, right? Have you all seen that where something was pruned at the wrong time and it's not blooming? So you planted it to have the blooms to attract the bees and the butterflies, but if you prune incorrectly, then you're not going to have it. So again, the intentions of habitat-friendly design may not be supported by landscape management. And again, whether that's you're hiring somebody or you're doing it yourself, if you don't know these sort of nuanced things, it's going to be a problem. So here's snowberry. We have excessive pruning. We get these little green meatballs, when really this is what the plant wants to look like, right? That's the full expression of this plant's habit. Even habitat super nature loving gardeners, I have seen them do that sort of thing, because it's sort of like, oh, I want it to be, a certain way. So you don't want that. You want the plants to fully express themselves. Before you prune shrubs, you've got to ask, what's the purpose? So like, what do you think the purpose of this shrub is? Screening. Yeah, it's got some flowers. So maybe a little habitat, maybe a little screening. How about this one? We don't know, but it's flowers. It's kind of pretty. We're not doing this, I know, but what's the purpose of this shrub? Screening, right? So we just need to know, like, why are we planting these shrubs? How about this? What is the purpose of these shrubs?
Decoration.
Yes, decoration. Little, you can't quite call those meatballs, but it's something. Tradition, it's a horticultural style. We're certainly not doing that here. But we do want to know what we're trying to do before we change our shrubs, or before we prune our shrubs. So this is that mock orange from the Cheyenne experiment station. This is my favorite shrub probably. It grows really well down where I live. So we want to, for habitat, we want to prune to maximize the flower show for us and anybody driving by our yard, but also of course for the pollinators. We have to understand again, what wood different species bloom on. Most shrubs flower less on the older woody stems and more on new wood. And generally speaking, shearing is bad. People think, oh, this will be fast, I'll just shear it, but you get all kinds of funny growth patterns if you do that. So do you all know what I'm talking about when I say blooming on old wood or new wood? Is that, okay, I'm hearing some no's, some yeses. So spring flowering shrubs tend to bloom on old wood. So in the spring they bloom, over the summer they set buds for the next spring, and then they go through fall, winter, and then they're ready to bloom nice and early again. So you can imagine if you prune this at the wrong time, you're going to cut off all the blooms, like this. Yeah. That's pretty goofy looking. So this is a lilac. Clearly this was pruned at the wrong time because it could look like this. Now, what I have here is pruned right after blooming allows new buds to form. My guess is that's very high up and they just didn't prune up there, right? They went as high as they could and they stopped. And then you just need to put some googly eyes on there and you got a funny little haircut. Just a couple of examples of spring flowering shrubs. This is flowering quince, non-native, but lovely. These like it. Don't know if it'll work up here. And then, of course, the mock orange, which is just amazing. So then we have summer flowering shrubs, and they tend to bloom on new wood or current season wood. So in the spring, they start to grow, they're setting their buds for summer, and then they flower, go into fall and winter, and then they set their new growth again. So you're gonna prune these at a very different time, right? So when would you prune this one? Yeah, right after it is bloomed because, or at least before it starts blooming in the spring, before it starts growing in the spring because it's going to set the blooms, buds that spring. So that's super important. The golden currant and Bluebis spirea, both summer flowering shrubs. So here it is, I'm sort of laying it out again. Spring flowering, prune immediately after they're done blooming. You can thin and you can shape, but if your goal is flowers, the timing is what you really want to pay attention to. If your shrub is just totally overgrown and you need to do sort of like a rejuvenation pruning is what we call it, where you're going all the way back, cutting it all the way back, most shrubs respond pretty well to that, not all. You want to do that in late winter or early spring. You won't have flowers the next year, but that's okay. Summer flowering, you can rejuvenate in late winter or early spring, and you will get flowers because again, you're cutting off that older growth. And then of course you can do minor pruning at any time. Okay, so now if we're looking at grasses and how we manage grass, buffalo grass, grama lawns, these kinds of things people are really trying. This is a buffalo grass lawn that has been mowed way too much. People thought, I'm going to put in this water-wise native buffalo grass, and then I'm just going to mow it like I mowed my other grass. And this is full of the Canada thistle, and there's some clover and all kinds of stuff. This is one that hasn't been mowed, and it's lovely. It's got its little seed heads and it's doing just fine. So again, we have to shift the way we think about our maintenance. Here, does anybody have buffalo grass here? A couple people. How is it doing? Did it work? Great. Okay, yeah, I'm saying yeses. Okay, that's good. People down where I am from have mixed success, but for the most part, people are getting the hang of it. It's getting more and more common to plant it by plugs. So that would look like this, and it grows in really quite quickly. And so this is the same summer. So planted early summer, and that's what it looks like towards the end of the year. So that is the variety called Prestige. And then this one is UC Verde. Again, you can treat them differently. So this one is actually mowed, but it's only done a couple times a season and not too low. So when I was saying you can make any plant look any way you want it to, that's pretty neat and tidy and orderly, but it's buffalo grass, right? Or you can have it look a little more fluffy and soft and wild and not actually mow it. There's another one, more buffalo grass. And again, we have to understand the difference between warm season and cool season grasses. So buffalo grass, for example, is a warm season grass. So it is going to put on all of its growth and it's going to start to green up only during our warm months. So here that is July to August. No, I don't know. When is it? Or June, you start to warm up June to like September maybe? Is that right? Yeah. June to September. So that is a big shift aesthetically. So whether you're like, yeah, I got this, I know all this, you all can be educating people that are coming by your yard, right? They're like, oh, your grass looks brown. Well, yes, that's because it's a warm season grass. It will green up when the weather warms up. So it's managing and sort of changing these expectations, either for yourself or your neighbors. Blue grama grass, this is the same spot. This is where it is. It's going gangbusters in the warm summer, and then here it is, still looking lovely with all of its pretty seed heads, but just a little bit browned out and more dormant. So I don't know that there's confusion in this room, but somebody was talking about blonde ambition, and Lauren was saying plant and straight species. So blonde ambition can get like 2 feet by 2 feet. It's showy, it's beautiful. This is the straight species, and it sort of fills in like that, and it's much, much smaller, the individual plant. There you go. Here it is mown, just to sort of have a contrast so that people can see you can mow it, or you can let it, I should show over here too, or you can let it have its pretty seed heads and again, fully express its habit. Some more examples. All right, so now we're going to look at perennials. One of the great things about being a habitat gardener and a native plant gardener is you can be a little bit lazy. Back to that maintenance chart that I had, these plants definitely need far less maintenance. They need some maintenance, but not a ton. So why do we not want to cut everything back in the fall? First of all, winter interest, right? We've all seen it in person. We've seen pictures. Just imagine if these grasses were just sheared off right there. So many people do that. This is beautiful. It gives you, I definitely believe that even in harsh climates, our gardens have 4 seasons of interest. There's the whole idea of putting your garden to bed in the fall. No, you don't need to do that. Yes, everything's going to go dormant, but it doesn't mean you just have to cut everything back. That, to me, is an absolutely beautiful vignette with the red twig dogwood in the back and the evergreens. By leaving things up, you're also protecting the plants from desiccation and frost heaving. So if you think about plants in nature, they're not getting cut back, right? They keep their foliage through the next season. So Denver has more freeze and thaw cycles than any other city in the US. So it freezes really hard and then it warms up. It freezes really hard and then it warms up. And that's doing all kinds of things to the soil. It's contracting and expanding, and that's doing all kinds of things to the plants too. And when you can leave those plants standing, they're going to respond much better. And then for habitat, it provides cover for overwintering wildlife, of course, and also winter food and shelter for birds. So again, down where I am. I feel like I'm such a foreigner. I don't live that far away. But are the chickadees out here yet? Are you hearing them? The male, you know how they do the, I'm not gonna whistle, but the, you know. So they are back where we are. And Lauren was talking about the cedar waxwings. They came through my area last weekend, and we just, you know, for those of you that know them, they're there in mass and then they're gone. And I was so happy that we were home when we were there, when they were there, because now they're gone. They were going after a crabapple tree. Okay, so here's an example of wide leaf plants. So this isn't a big commercial sort of strip mall parking lot. I was walking to a store. This is, you can see pretty much what season it is. And I was hearing all this rustling and all this tweeting. I was like, what is that? And then I realized, oh, there's a little bird right there. I can point just for fun for anybody looking at all the screens. So I was like, okay, I'm gonna try to not scare it, but this is a perfect example of urban wildlife in habitat. The cynical side of me thought, I bet they just ran out of time and people power, and that's why they left these things standing, but maybe they did it for on purpose. There again, fuzzy pictures, but there are these little sparrows. And I thought, oh, how wonderful. And then here they are as I got closer. So they were just there were a ton of them in there. I couldn't really get good pictures. But there's Indian rice grass and switchgrass, and they were just at a like all you can eat buffet, loving it, eating these seeds of switchgrass, which was so cool to see. And you know, it was on a sunny, I don't know, November day or something. And now I put this little note up top, cultivars. I wanted to mention something. Somebody asked a question about you're creating a 4-H pollinator nursery plant garden, and you're asking about what to plant. And I think that's fantastic. I love that you're doing that. Great education for the kids. And then secondly, Lauren mentioned that you have to be careful about cultivars. And one of the biggest things that you have to be careful about with cultivars of native plants is leaf color change. So like Blonde Ambition was the example. I don't know that Blonde Ambition would be an issue for invertebrates that like blue grama grass, but there are things like switchgrass that have lots of cultivars. Shenandoah is one. It's beautiful, but it has very purpley red leaves. Whereas straight species switchgrass has more of a blue, greenish color. And that switch from green to purpley red, that is what is confusing to the invertebrates. So there's a species of skipper, I think, that is reliant on switchgrass, and they're not going to recognize the purpley switchgrass. So you might think, oh, I'm planting switchgrass for this species. That's great, but it's not going to work there. So that was my quick note on cultivars. The biggest issue, the more research needs to be done, and it is being done, but the biggest issue that they have found so far is when the cultivars have a different leaf color. So I want to make sure I pointed that out. Okay, more about why we're not cutting everything back in the winter. Again, hollow stems for overwintering invertebrates, particularly native bees. If you don't see it, there's a little native bee poking her head out of that cane there. And here are some plants that have good pithy stems for cavity nesting bees. So raspberries, goldenrod, ironweed, the coneflowers, bee balm, and then a lot of our ornamental grasses. Some bees, ornamental grasses, it sounds like bees wouldn't be able to do that, but some of our bees are teeny tiny, like Perdita minima, which I think comes up here, though I'm not sure. It's 2 millimeters long, so it's teeny tiny. So if you can have a nice variety of plants with these pithy stems, then you're potentially providing overwintering habitat for these bees. So it's not just about having the flowers for the adults, but we also have to provide things for the babies too. And then again, we talked about leaves a little bit. Leaves can be mowed over and mulched, or they can be left on the lawn or raked into garden beds. And again, so many invertebrates are going to be taking advantage of overwintering in this leaf litter. Here's just another example of what that might look like. This, in fact, is Well, one ambition, thank you. We've mentioned it many times. And this is a catmint, and we've got some Galaria, and we just this is a demonstration garden, we just kind of shoved all these leaves into there to sort of provide insulation. And there's a good chance that a bumblebee queen might be overwintering there. Bumblebees are kind of the most rugged wild bees, I think, out there, because like honeybees, they're in their hive and they've got each other and they're staying warm in there. Back to like the cavity nesting bees, they just have their larvae that are overwintering, but bumblebee queens actually overwinter as themselves, and they're just gonna find some leaf litter. Often you find them at the base of an ornamental grass like this. And so if you can provide a little more insulation there, then she'll be able to better survive and then go out and make her nest the following spring. And just another winter interest picture. Okay, so back to our habitat maintenance. Can somebody give me a time check? With the schedule changes, I can't remember what time I started or what time I have until.
Okay, you have 18 minutes.
18 minutes, okay, thank you. So pest management. So this isn't necessarily something that people think they need to think about when you're gardening for wildlife and pollinators. But you know, we can still get pests. And so it's important to think about it and kind of have a plan. So of course, a general plan is you want to ensure the right plants that are in the right place. We all hear that, right plant, right place. Habitat, you want to design landscapes to coexist with local wildlife. So, you know, rabbits and caterpillars, they're a fact of life, and we can use the right plants and kind of allow them some things to be eaten, but know that they're not going to mow down everything. When I worked at the Wildflower Center, there's they call it the butterfly garden. Has anybody been to the Wildflower Center? Yeah, a couple people. Oh yeah, nice. So there's a butterfly garden, and one of the plants they plant there is passion flower vine. And if you've ever seen passion flower, it gets this crazy cool alien-looking big flower and some really cool fruit. So it's really great for visitors to be able to see that. And queen butterflies love passion flower vine. So what they do there is they grow a whole sort of block of passion flower vines for the visitors, and then a block for the caterpillars, and they actually pull the caterpillars off the visitors' vines onto the caterpillar vines so they can mow it down, and then we have more butterflies, and then the visitors get to actually see the passion flower vine. So, you know, I don't know if you're going to be doing that in your own garden, but that kind of thinking is where we want to move to. And then again, pest management, use appropriate and diverse plant material, right? More diversity means more resilience in our landscape because we're creating a healthy ecosystem that will then help control insect and disease problems. So we're trying to get things into balance, right? So there are natural predators of pests. So if we have good diversity, then hopefully things can balance out and kind of take care of themselves. So I'm guessing that most people have heard of IPM. And this is where you're sort of paying attention to all the tools in the toolbox to be able to handle any kind of weed or animal pest. So again, you've got your controls, you're monitoring, you're deciding on what your threshold, your tolerance is, and then how you want to treat if you need to. For pollinator habitat, we have something called integrated pest and pollinator management. The ag world is kind of using this a little bit, and definitely people that are working with pollinators are. So it's the same thing as IPM, but we're also looking at the impact of any management techniques on pollinator habitats. So we have the same, you know, monitor, threshold, cost benefit, but we're just putting in biodiversity. So we're monitoring what are conditions at the site, including biodiversity. So we're just sort of calling it out. Some people argue, well, a good IPM program includes considering pollinators, but if it's really important, why not just call it out, just to make sure? Again, getting into more IPM with weeds, not just animal pests, where we have those ground nesting bees, and again, what is this? So 90% of bees are solitary bees and 70% of those are ground nesters. So most of our native bees actually nest in the ground. So we have to think about what our ground treatment is. So we want to pay attention to, like mulch, of course, is really important for plants and water conservation. But if we're mulching everything with 4 inches of wood bark or gravel, there's no open space for the ground nesting bees, right? So you want to pay attention. So we're not saying don't mulch, but we're saying maybe if there's an area that makes sense to not mulch, then you do that. And it doesn't mean native bees are definitely going to move in, but at least you're giving them a shot. And then, of course, limit disturbance of soil in your managed plantings because you might have ground nesting bees. Some of the biggest, so as I said, native bees are solitary, so they don't have hives, they're not working collaboratively like honeybees, but there will be aggregations of the same kind of bee species that they kind of have a neighborhood. So they'll have a lot of different holes in the same area, but it's just a single queen that's laying her eggs in her tunnel. So it's like their neighbors. And I would think, oh, it's got to be just right, and it's got to be it's probably kind of fragile. Some of the biggest aggregations of native bee nests that I've seen are on trailheads, where people are hiking, the soil is compacted, dogs are running back and forth, and I have seen lots of native bee nests there. So anyway, if you think you have something that looks like an anthill, could be a native bee nest. And then again, you want to time or scale your weed management practices as much as you can to not interfere with wildlife life cycles. So we're getting a much more intimate knowledge of everyone and everything that is using our gardens. Consider the use of cover crops to outcompete weeds and exhaust soil seed banks. So Lauren was talking about smooth brome. So hard to get rid of. I'm so impressed that she did one application and the smooth brome was gone because it is a beast. But you can try overseeding with cover crops, and those are things that you don't allow to go to seed, and you either pull or till in or plant in among, and it's building the soil and it's outcompeting those weeds. Again, mulch, you want to pay attention to where you're getting your mulch from. Sometimes, so I work for Extension, I used to be a county extension agent, and we would get calls like, my plants are dying, I can't figure out what's going on. We go out and take a look and we can see there's pesticide damage on the perennials. We're asking, did you use pesticides? Was there drift? Did your neighbor? Anyway, I have seen more than, I don't know, a dozen times where the mulch actually had something in it that was impacting and affecting the plants. So you want to know where you're sourcing your mulch from. Of course, you want to avoid plastic and landscape fabric for a variety of reasons. It doesn't really hold back weeds that well. Native bees can't nest under there. It can become hydrophobic and not allow water to infiltrate. This is just more on the sort of sustainable landscape maintenances, but you want to recycle your plant trimmings and your annual leaf litter if you can. And then again, allow for those areas of bare soil where it makes sense, especially if you know that ground nesting bees are present. All right, so on to mulch. What is it? It's a material that we apply to soil to protect, insulate, and improve soil and plant health. And ideally, so it can be organic, and by that we mean wood, bark chips, straw, grass clippings, etc. We don't want to do gorilla hair. Is gorilla hair mulch popular here? I would guess it sort of weaves together, which is nice so that it doesn't blow away. However, it's not the best for plants because it kind of mats and weaves together. It can also become hydrophobic. Water will not infiltrate through it. It'll just sheet flow off of it. And so if we're trying to hold moisture in, but we're not allowing the moisture in, that doesn't make sense. So
well, what we're doing then is that when we use the gorilla hair mulch,
yeah,
there's irrigation under the
irrigation under.
system.
Okay, so she's saying they're using it because I'm sure it works well for you, but they have their irrigation underneath it, so that works. But then I guess just natural precipitation wouldn't make it. But yeah, that's a good solution. So you can use organic or inorganic. So if you're doing really drought tolerant xeric stuff, then you're probably going to want some rock or gravel. I'll get to that a little bit later. But ideally, your mulch is not compacting. Again, it's not hindering air and water. It breaks down slowly. Some people put down compost as mulch, but that's breaking down too quickly, potentially adding too much organic matter to your soil. A lot of these native plants, they don't want all that organic matter. And then our mulches are going to help regulate soil temperature and help prevent soil erosion. Okay, so right plant, right place, we talk about that a lot. So this is Delosperma ice plant. These are two examples of it in its native habitat. This might look like bark, but that's actually rock. So it grows in very hard, South Africa, very harsh, very rocky, dry areas. We use it here a ton, or like along the Front Range, and I've definitely seen it up here a bunch. So this is often what we see. What is a major difference that you see between natural habitat and where somebody planted it? Anybody notice? Bark mulch, irrigate that little blue thing, irrigation head right in the middle of it, right in the crown. That is not gonna survive. That is gonna rot out and die. So you wanna match, so yes, we wanna do right plant, right place. We also want to do right mulch to the right plant. So this plant should probably have an inorganic, like squeegee, if you know what that is, or pea gravel kind of mulch around it, because this is going to hold too much moisture and it's just going to rot out. And it might do well for a while, but eventually it's not probably going to survive. We also see this kind of thing. This is a sagebrush with this little mound of organic bark mulch there. That is absolutely going to rot that plant out. It is not what it needs. Interestingly, do you see all this grass coming up? They did not effectively get rid of all of the invasive grass before they planted their shrubs. So that's just going to be a big headache later. You can apply mulch any time of year. For weed suppression, you really need a thick layer, even if you're putting down gravel mulch. There are studies that show that you need 4 inches, which is a ton of gravel mulch, but 4 inches if you want weed suppression. If you're not worried about having to get out there and weed a little bit, then you can do less. And for water evaporation, you don't want the gravel to be larger than a 1/4 inch, because then there's too much pore space and the water's just gonna evaporate. You absolutely don't want to, this is just for plant health, not for habitat, but if your tree is habitat, then it is for habitat. You don't want to do volcano mulches. We see this a ton, like all over the country I see this. People pile the mulch up thinking they're doing the right thing, but that is not what you want. And if you can see, hopefully this bottom graphic, the one on the left, it mounted up against the tree trunk. That is slowly going to suffocate that tree. Lots of oxygen and air exchange happens at the trunk flare at the bottom of the tree where it goes out. And if you pile stuff up against that, it's going to slowly kill it. So you want to do what you see all the way to the right, where you're mulching around the root zone, but you don't need that mulch right against the trunk of the tree. Again, there's another example. You can even have a gap, a 3 to 6 inch gap right around the trunk. And what we're trying to do is cover the root zone. Okay, just a little note on cover crops. I don't see people doing this a lot, but it is something that, you can kind of experiment with. So again, cover crops that are going to cover the soil surface. A lot of them are going to fix nitrogen. You get that green manure that's going to be tilled into the soil, and you can enhance soil fertility, although we'll talk about tilling in a second. To till or not to till. A lot of people, even when we're talking perennials, they think, oh, I'm going to till and loosen up the soil before I do anything, especially if you have really tough soil. But you have to be careful with that because it can really break up the soil structure. And we're finding more and more that that's actually really harmful and does not help the plants. So rather than like really chopping it up to get a really fine soil, you want to just, maybe take a shovel like in the picture or a broadfork if you know what that is. Just kind of loosen it up, but don't till it till there's nothing left. Soil is very much alive. When we're talking about habitat gardening, I don't know that Habitat Heroes is paying attention too much. Maybe they are, I could be wrong. But to the habitat in the soil. People say it's the most biologically diverse habitat on the planet. There's so much going on down below our feet. So nematodes, fungi, bacteria, and you may have heard this before, but can anybody guess so picture a teaspoon, you're in your kitchen, you get your teaspoon out. In 1 teaspoon of soil, there are more microbes than what? Or guess how many microbes there are in 1 teaspoon of soil. And we're talking about, so this is a picture, electron microscopy picture of all the little fungi and nematodes and bacteria in 1 teaspoon. Be brave. Is it more than 100? A billion? Did somebody say a billion? That is bold. It's more. How many billion? So at the end of 2023, the planet tipped the scales. We have over 8 billion people on the planet now. In a teaspoon of soil, there are more microbes than there are people on the planet. It's mind-blowing. Crazy, a teaspoon. So anyway, it's active. It's, you want it to be healthy. It's going to support your plants. The plants are going to support the wildlife and the pollinators. So when we're looking at native plants, many of them have these very, I don't know why I'm only on this screen. Many of them have these very, very long root systems. So these are all Great Plains species, but some of them grow here too. And so if you're looking at it, at the very bottom is 15 feet. So if you were east of here, Kansas, Nebraska, Midwest, some of these species have roots that will go 15 feet below ground. So like big blue stem, this one is big blue stem. It's clocking in at 9-foot deep roots. Little blue stem is on there. Liatris that was talked about quite a bit is on there. So our soils are much, much tougher. So they're probably like a half to maybe a third this deep, but still these native plants, they have very fibrous, deep roots. They're building soil. They can get water more easily. So what is going on below ground is really impressive in addition to what we have going on above ground. So with soil management, we really want to avoid soil compaction. So anything that you're doing, if you're having a new patio put in or your driveway is being fixed, don't let people drive on turf or any of your landscape. It's so hard to come back from compacted soil, so just avoid it to begin with. Soil improvement for habitat management, only improve it where it's needed for the plants that are not adapted to exist in those conditions, but more ideally, use plants that are adapted to exist in those conditions. And of course, improve soil if you can using on-site resources. So again, back to this adaptive management framework, we're trying to think through all of these things when we're thinking about how we're managing our land. And so the evaluation piece, we're evaluating, so design legibility, so that just means like, is our design working? Are people reading it as it is something that is intentional? Is it actually functioning? Are the plants healthy? Are we increasing that biodiversity? So one thing with design legibility, so again, to somebody's garden that got mowed down, if anybody knows Marcia Petro, I think is how you say her last name, one of the things that she says is always put something in your meadow, like, a piece of art or a bird bath or some sort of cue that tells people, oh, this is definitely intentional. Like, this is part of the plan. So that can be a little psychological piece to cue to people that I'm doing this on purpose, it's not a way to pass. So when you get to the resources page, and you're all going to pull out your phones in just a second and click on it, and then you'll have access to this habitat document. You'll see we have invertebrate habitat requirements, bird habitat requirements, common threats to backyard birds, so just all of these things that are going to be helpful for you to learn about. So again, when we're maintaining these habitats, we want to think about biodiversity and complexity. We're not just planting a few pretty things for curb appeal, but we're really creating these dynamic systems. We're probably shifting our timing. That's one of the biggest maintenance differences. We have to pay attention to scale. So, are we doing a wholesale change of our yard? Is it a small change? And then also assess any potential negative impacts, like know the challenges, know the positives, know the negatives. And all of these adjustments definitely require some extra knowledge and attention. But once you're there, then you're getting all kinds of cool things in your yard, and you're really having a huge impact on the ecosystems around you. So educate. You all can be educators. You can tell your neighbors. You can tell your county commissioners, your city council members. help them understand the importance. It's pretty cool that you have somebody that's interested in native plants. We need home gardeners who understand how to maximize their sites. We need professionals who can help make clients' visions a reality. So we have a lot of people that are like, I want pollinator habitat, but don't really know what that means. So if they can hire people, then that's a bonus. Okay, all the QR codes are coming. Now I have like 4 of them. So you're gonna take the picture, click, it'll open a website, then you go back to your camera and do it again. But let me explain where you're clicking. So CSU Extension has a new program called Landscape for Life. It was developed with the United States Botanic Garden and the Lady Bird Johnson Wildflower Center. And this is an opportunity for more education on sustainable landscaping. It's an online class. If anybody is in the industry, this one might not be of so much interest to people, but we are doing trainings for cities. And so that was one of the things that your city council member was talking about, or somebody was talking about. We need professionals. Oh, it was her in the back. We need all the professionals to come together and have the conversation so that people are on the same page. Because if only some of the group that is doing this knows what's going on, then it's not gonna work. So this is if you're interested in bringing this kind of program to Cheyenne or wherever you might live. It just brings you to an interest form and we'll get back to you. Oh, I have a ton of these. If you haven't heard of this, this is the Landscaping with Colorado, which political borders Wyoming to. Native Plants Conference. Yes, it's somewhat focused on Colorado plants, but really we live in ecoregions. It's March 8th. It's at CSU. And so that takes you to the registration for the conference. It's our 10th annual. We have tracks new to natives and knows the natives, so a great educational day down there at CSU. And then finally, this is where everybody wants. These are the talk resources. So if you don't have a phone and can't do the QR code, that address there, if you can write that down, if you type that into your web browser, it'll take you to this. And what you're gonna see, it's a little funny, it says Lisa's presentation resources. So this is sort of a recycling of a resource list from another program that I do with a colleague named Lisa. But this is where you're gonna find the habitat-friendly maintenance guidelines. It's a PDF document. There's field guides to identifying bees. There's all kinds of information on pollinator habitat and how to support invertebrates. And with that, I am done, and I thank you all very, very much. I will My email address is there. If you want to reach out, by all means, please do. I can certainly go across the state border and help out up here. If I'm a little slow, my apologies. If you're not hearing back from me, email me again, because I do try to answer all my emails.
Well, thank you, Deryn.
Yes.
That was great. And I hope everyone got the resources part of it, because we don't have time for questions.
Okay, sorry I went along with the questions, but thank you, everybody.
That was great.